January 28th, 2019. Our first animated tiger. I hired a nice man named Leonard Nagu from Cameroon yesterday on Upwork to create our first CGI, computer-generated image, tiger. Meanwhile, Howard had an interesting exchange with Robert Moore. And this is an email from Robert Moore to Howard Baskin. Hi, Howard. I've just completed a 3-week trip through Oklahoma working on the Joe Exotic story for New York Magazine and as an 8-part podcast for Wondery, the makers of Dirty John and Dr. Death. At one point or another, I've interviewed upwards of 24 former employees of the zoo from all eras of its existence, including all of the zoo's major figures. My editor's primary concern right now is whether you and Carole will one day be willing to talk with me. So I'm writing to ask, is there any chance we could sit down again once the trial is all wrapped up? I really enjoyed the conversation we had a few years ago. You were both candid, eloquent, and very generous with your time. Since I know how busy you are, I feel bad asking to take up yet more time, but in order to record an NPR quality podcast like the ones Wondery specializes in, I need to capture high-def audio, which means that I needed to re-record all of my interviews with a big fancy microphone rather than cheap recorder I used last time. Of course, if need be, I can still use the audio I captured last time. Your voices will just sound tinny and far off, which is not ideal. Also, with the benefit of hindsight, I would structure my questions slightly differently. As I've been putting together the structural outline of this podcast, I've realized that the way this story ends is most likely with you and Carole finally, either figuratively or physically, walking through the gates of the GW Zoo as its new owners. If so, I want to be there on that day. But more importantly, I want to tell the story of how you and Carole have gotten to this point, and to capture the philosophy that undergirds your work. And when I say you and Carole, I mean it. If you're willing, this time I'd love to sit down with you, separately, and do a deep dive on the work you've done behind the scenes to investigate Joe. As you've noted before, it is amazing how few of Joe's closest confidants, and even Joe himself, understood your involvement in all of this. You wrote to me a while back that you probably will hate the story that I one day write. I really hope that is not the case. You astutely pointed out that a certain amount of sensationalism is necessary to make a story saleable, and while that's true, I'd like to think that I have enough pride in my work not to create something that is hacky or dishonest or worse. I want to allow you and Carole to get your argument out there, and I want to tell a good, taut, exciting story. After all, the story is the sugar that makes the proverbial medicine go down. This might be tipping my hand too much, but I'll say it anyway. I view you two as the heroes, albeit controversial heroes, of this strange, often grisly saga. I will not shy away from that controversy, but neither will I revel in it. In the end, listeners will come away with 2 things about you in mind: that you were the ones fighting to free animals from a never-ending cycle of abuse, and that you're the ones who came out on top. Alas, I've written too much. But, especially after the long and thoughtful email you wrote me after reading my book, I feel it's necessary to let you know how I'm approaching this subject. I'm going to ask for another day of your busy time. I figure it's the least I can do. Many thanks, Rob. This was Howie's response. I appreciate your frankness and will return in kind. While I did take a liking to you in the course of your visit, the reason I said I would likely hate your story is based on 2 things. We have, on occasion, had media come to us claiming they wanted to expose some bad guy and then write pieces that the bad guy would happily pay for. A writer for Rolling Stone did that to us with respect to Doc Antle a few years ago. Worse than waste our time. Some of the questions you asked, and the way you asked them, made me think you were drinking Joe's Koolaid and wanting to drag up all the crap he says about Carole. You spent a large amount of time on things like the disappearance of Carole's husband, and what I consider very old crap that is irrelevant to the issue at hand, but makes for salacious reading. Second, based on the questions you asked and what you spent your time on, I came away at the end of your visit feeling like, at best, you were going to position this as a feud, a personal battle between 2 individuals. We find this characterization both frustrating and inaccurate. A feud is a personal conflict. While Joe has, for years, attacked us personally, including incredibly crude, vile, often sexually oriented personal attacks, as you know, we have never responded in kind. Even when I have been with Joe in person, which has been at mediations, I have simply ignored that and treated him cordially. He even said once that he appreciated that I treated him in a gentlemanly fashion. We have always focused single-mindedly on the issue, which is the treatment of the cats, not on Joe personally. And we have not singled out Joe. We have done the same with many others we view as mistreating big cats. The only reason we spent so much time on Joe is that he was foolish enough to provoke us into the lawsuit which consumed so much time. We would have had no problem with Joe continuing to operate a zoo if he just stopped breeding cats and doing cub petting. Also, again, being frank here, I thought it was inconsiderate that I got no reply to my email about your book, which I did enjoy. Think about how that came across to me. Guy is all over us when he needs us, then does not have the courtesy to even acknowledge an email where I show interest in him. How many of your other interviewees bought and read your book? Then, many months later, when he wants something from me, here he is again with a hollow apology. No one is too busy to send a one-line email of acknowledgement. It was just poor form. But please, let's say no more about it. All that being said, I respect that you have done all the work you describe above, and am willing to take you at your word, and we can get together after the trial and do so with a positive, upbeat approach to your work. I do feel you are a very capable writer. Howard Baskin. If you're enjoying my diary, please like, share, and subscribe. You can find other ways to connect to me over at bigcatrescue.org/Carole.Baskin.